Today, we're going to take a look at a Space Marine chapter so heretical, it looks like even Games Workshop tried to stop them existing. They don't just worship the Emperor, they worship a trinity. They don't just work closely with the Adeptus Mechanicus, they are kind of like the pet Space Marines of the Adeptus Mechanicus, which is something that breaks all of the Emperor's rules, and in particular the rule that says don't give Space Marines to the Adeptus Mechanicus. They're a really interesting, bizarre faction, and their gestation came in 2005 in a games day in Birmingham, in England, in the United Kingdom, in Old Earth, and in this games day, they were playing a campaign for the Battle of Kalevala. I had to check how that was spelled. Given that this was a big Games Workshop event, they wrote all of this lore for a Space Marine chapter that had this world as their homeworld. And this lore was written on a leaflet. And when I say leaflet, I mean a series of A4 pieces of paper, pretty much. And yet that lore was beloved by so many people in the Warhammer 40K fandom that people really latched on to this Space Marine chapter known as the Steel Confessors, and ultimately they gained quite a big following in the fandom. However, as you can probably guess, their lore was just on these A4 pieces of paper, and for a long time it seemed like all of these A4 pieces of paper were lost. And you might therefore be wondering, is this lore even canon? And actually, yeah, Warhammer 40k lore is very weird, but even that is canon. And we know it's canon because the Steel Confessors are referenced in the Night Lords trilogy, the first book, and in the Iron Hands trilogy, in the second book. So they're very much still around. They're very much still a chapter that exists in the setting, but their actual lore, which was written again on this random A4 leaflet, was lost until very recently, it seems. So I actually saw this from a Reddit post, and as you can see, somebody posted in the Lexicanum Discord, I believe it is, that they had actually found their old leaflet from the 2005 Games Day. This has been uploaded to Lexicanum. It has clarified some things and it has cleared up some things, and I'm going to take a look at it today because, like I say, despite the fact that so many fans loved this lore, these pieces of paper had been lost, and most people were trying to guess what it was really from memory. So today, for like probably the first time on YouTube, we're actually going to go through the official lore for the Steel Confessors. Despite coming from the gene seed of Ferrus Manus, the Steel Confessors were not created as part of the second or subsequent large-scale foundings from the original gene seed of the Iron Hands, and are in fact a relatively new chapter in the grand scheme of things. With the support that the Iron Hands chapter provides to the Adeptus Mechanicus, it was only a matter of time until gene seed was supplied to the Mechanicus that would allow them to build their own chapter. This chapter would be a rapid reaction force capable of defending important Mechanicus facilities on the rim of the known galaxy. And so were born the Steel Confessors. In M36, the Iron Hands sent 3 clan companies to aid Mechanicus Skitarii forces in the retaking of the Bara system, an important Mechanicus foundry and testing facility. The system had been captured by the Overlord Barhoth, a charismatic Chaos renegade capable of calling upon the aid of legions of followers. With the additional assistance of the Dark Mechanicum, traitorous tech adepts who had fallen to Chaos, he overran the system and turned the factories to aiding his war effort, perverting the will of the Omnissiah to his own foul ends. Initial attempts by the Mechanicus to recapture the system had been repulsed, with both heavy losses to the Skitarii and the local guard regiments sent to offer assistance. Despairing that their research facility would be lost forever to the Dark Powers, the heads of the Mechanicus sent an appeal to the Iron Hands, a chapter that had aided them in the past and shared many of the same ideals. The resulting campaign was harsh, with neither side asking nor expecting quarter. The Iron Hands were a godsend for the battered Mechanicus forces, striking the Overlord's armies without warning, then redeploying once resistance began to stiffen in order to attack from another direction. Meanwhile, the Mechanicus and Guard forces tied up the reinforcements sent to the area. This saw positive results, with a foothold being established on Barus III, the main foundry within the system. Over the following months, this was consolidated until 75% of the planet was once again under Imperial control. The three clan companies then began to widen the sphere of their actions to incorporate the other planets within the system. The Overlord's minions appeared to be no match for the wrath of the Emperor's chosen warriors, and soon planet after planet began to be regained. After 5 years of this constant campaigning, only one planet in the system remained in Barhoth's control. This was Tavor, a Mechanicus research facility that specialized in the refinement of shielding technologies. As a result, the planet was heavily defended, and the forces of the Imperium expected heavy losses in the planet's recapture. The Iron Hands stepped forward, eager to be at the forefront of the assault, knowing the importance of the planet and the death of a traitor was at hand. After a long bombardment, a hole was opened in the planet's shield, and the Iron Hands launched their Thunderhawks, committing all three companies to the assault. However, Barhoth had planned for this, and as the Thunderhawks entered the planet's atmosphere within the shield, they came under an unrelenting fire from the planet's defense batteries, all of which had been retargeted to the point where the Iron Hands had entered. Realizing that they had been drawn into a trap, Venerable Dreadnought Grixis from the Gravehold Clan Company, who had been put into overall command of the Iron Hands forces by the Great Council, ordered a retreat, hoping that they would be able to reorganize and strike elsewhere. As the Thunderhawks turned for the hole in the shield, all communications with their ships in orbit were cut and the breach in the shield closed over. This left Grixis with little choice but to order the Iron Hands towards the planet, knowing that they were surely entering a trap. The fire from the planetary defense batteries continued unabated, and barely half of the three companies survived the planetfall. Grixis organized the surviving Marines around the spaceport, planning to hold out until relief was able to punch through to them. In orbit, the Iron Hand strike cruisers were not inactive, and whilst a concentrated bombardment began alongside the Imperial Navy, Captain Ulenia of the strike cruiser Omnissiah's Might signaled the Great Council to inform them and request additional aid. Unfortunately, the closest force that the Iron Hands could dispatch was a month away. Knowing that potentially 3 entire companies were facing complete annihilation, the Great Council also requested additional aid from the Adeptus Mechanicus, reminding them of their ties of loyalty. The Mechanicus responded and sent forces from all surrounding systems, including elements of the forces of the newly won planets within the Barus system. A vast armada surrounded Tavor, all awaiting the destruction of the planet's shield, with over 500 ships aiding the firepower. Under such a colossal weight of fire, rents started to appear in the previously impregnable shield. The Mechanicus commanders wasted no time and deployed over 100,000 Skitarii and 4 Warhound Titans through the breaches. All headed for the spaceport as communications were re-established with the surviving Iron Hands. The scene around the spaceport as the troops landed was one of complete devastation. The Overlord had committed his finest troops to the destruction of the Iron Hands, and the weight of numbers along with their loss of maneuverability had taken their toll. Of the 300 Marines that had been committed to the assault on the planet, only 11 remained alive, most of them bearing grievous injuries. As the Skitarii secured the spaceport and began to push the traitors back once more, the shields finally collapsed and the rest of the Mechanicus forces began to deploy. This allowed the surviving Iron Hands time to recoup their precious gene seed that would allow them to rebuild their companies and to take stock of the tremendous losses to the chapter they had suffered. All 3 clan company commanders had died, the last being Grixis mere hours before the liberation of the spaceport. In honor of the Mechanicus and the forces that they had committed to relieve the beleaguered clan companies, the Great Company agreed to provide the Adeptus Mechanicus with some gene seed, the idea being that the Adeptus Mechanicus might be able to take this gene seed and build their own rapid reaction force. In return, the Mechanicus sent their most revered artificers in order to assist with the rebuilding of the companies, and dedicated 3 entire Forge Worlds to their rearmament. The gene seed that the Mechanicus received was a sample from each of the clan companies, and some of the chapter's greatest heroes. No time was wasted in the use of the gene seed, and the new fledgling chapter began to take shape. It wasn't long before the Inquisition of the Ordo Hereticus found out about what had transpired and petitioned for the destruction of this unauthorized chapter, questioning the motives of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Upon review, the High Lords of Terra allowed the Mechanicus to keep the chapter, as long as they followed all the ties of loyalty that other Marine chapters were required to do, such as the submission of gene seed for testing. Feeling that they were being forced to succumb to unfair guidelines for the chapter, the Adeptus Mechanicus decided to name it the Steel Confessors. The original homeworld for the chapter was a forge world called Craxis 4, located on the eastern rim of the galaxy. The forge world specialized in the production of small arms and was situated in what was considered to be a quiet sector of the galaxy. It seemed like an ideal place for the Steel Confessors to take as their homeworld, loyal to both the Imperium and the Adeptus Mechanicus, with a sizable population that the Steel Confessors could recruit from. Craxis 4 was also central for all Mechanicus facilities in that sector of space, allowing the chapter to deploy with ease wherever they would be needed. The location of the chapter could also remain secret, as the planet was shielded by a device that was taken from Tavor and made the planet appear as a barren rock to any sensors sweeping nearby. In a relative backwater that would allow the rest of the galaxy to forget about them, the Steel Confessors were given time to hone their skills. This secrecy was to prove a double-edged sword as the Tyrannid menace surfaced. As the Great Devourer that was High Fleet Behemoth tore its way across the galaxy, the Steel Confessors were in the forefront in the battles against it, buying time for the Mechanicus planets to evacuate essential personnel and materials. This spread the chapter thinly across the entire eastern rim of the Imperium. The Steel Confessors cared not where they fought, so long as they could serve their masters. This unflinching loyalty was to prove the undoing for their homeworld, believing the planet safe behind its shielding. Chapter Master Protonus did not consider the Tyrannids a threat to Craxis 4. When the High Fleet appeared on the outer edges of the system, the only Marines in the system were Protonus himself and half of the First Company. Protonus immediately ordered the return of the 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 9th Companies, all of them being closer to Craxis 4 than their brethren. He then turned to the defense of his homeworld. The battle for the planet lasted 3 months as the companies arrived and took up positions beside their battle brothers. Every meter of ground given up by the Steel Confessors was paid for at a horrendous cost by the Tyrannids. However, numbers were on the hive mind's side, and for every 10 that died, 50 took their place. Realizing their home was lost, Protonus ordered the transports to be readied in order to salvage as much as possible. As if sensing the end was near, the Tyrannids renewed their assault, finally gaining entrance to the fortress monastery. While the remnants of the survivors made for the transport, Protonus and his First Company provided a rear guard. After a vicious struggle, the remnants of the first company made it to the transports, bearing the body of their chapter master, who had suffered horrendous injuries, destroying a hive tyrant in order to slow the Tyrannid menace. Craxus 4 was left to its fate as the surviving Marines escaped to rendezvous with the rest of the chapter. Since the loss of Craxus 4, the chapter has been fleet-based, with the exception of its librarium and the tomb of the original chapter master, Avonis, who it is said is held in stasis until such a time that the chapter needs him. Both of these are on the planet of Kalevala, a place that the Steel Confessors have sworn to defend from any threat. Like their forefathers, the Iron Hands, the Steel Confessors have an uncompromising hatred of weakness in any form. Also, given their ties with the Adeptus Mechanicus, bionic enhancement is the norm. All the Marines of the chapter have a degree of affinity with machinery, and this is a prime requirement of potential recruits. With bionics to replace weakened limbs and organs, the chapter also undergoes regular testing to ensure their minds remain strong. Every brother is required to go through a period of training and indoctrination on Medusa under a clan company as part of the agreement between the Iron Hands and the Magi of the Adeptus Mechanicus. It is during this training that they learn the history of the Iron Hands. Unlike their progenitor chapter, they keep the role of chaplain and tech marine separate, not having Iron Fathers. Instead, every company captain is trained in the ways of the tech marine and artificer, and fulfills both roles as proof of his blessing of the Omnissiah. The chapter's chaplains are there to extol the virtues of constant struggle and intolerance for weakness, whilst ensuring the teachings of the Mechanicus are followed and due reverence is paid to the Divine Trinity. Chaplains are chosen for their ability to inspire their brethren through acts of divine courage and overcoming impossible odds. Like the Iron Hands, the Steel Confessors advance relentlessly, giving their enemies no time to reorganize as they throw themselves into almost berserk combat. The Steel Confessors have a full complement of Terminator suits that are maintained by both the chapter and the Adeptus Mechanicus Magi that are seconded to the chapter. These Terminator suits are seen at the forefront of most Confessor engagements to provide inspiration for the rest of the chapter and as a display of devotion to never-ending struggle. With the chapter having to evacuate its homeworld, much of its armoured support has been heavily damaged or destroyed. Even with the Mechanicus as an ally, the chapter has been so far unable to replace all of these losses. As a result, vehicles will only be deployed in the direst of circumstances. The organisation of the chapter follows the Codex quite closely, mainly due to the agreement between the Mechanicus and the High Lords of Terra. The first company is purely Terminators and rarely deploys in power armor. The second, third, fourth, and fifth companies are all battle companies. The sixth and seventh are tactical companies. Eighth is an assault company. Ninth is a devastator company, and 10th is a scout company. Unlike the Iron Hands, where it is known for the clan companies to fight amongst themselves on occasion, the Steel Confessors work together and there are close ties between the companies. Indeed, it is common for Marines to move between companies, with the exception of the 1st and 10th respectively, in order to learn from different commanders and to allow them to build up a wealth of experience. This results in a high level of autonomy, whatever the rank of Marine. The chapter master makes all major decisions for the chapter, but he gathers the opinions of the other company commanders in council sessions prior to making those decisions. The position of chapter master is voted for by each company commander, chaplain, librarian, and dreadnought. In the unlikely case of a tie, the 5 longest-serving veteran sergeants vote. The chapter has very strict beliefs and follows the idea of the Divine Trinity. This Trinity consists of the Omnissiah, the Emperor, and Ferrus Manus. The Omnissiah is the spirit that provides succor and strength to all things, whilst rewarding the quest for knowledge and improvement. The Emperor is the physical embodiment of the Omnissiah, there to crush the weak and provide an embodiment of knowledge incarnate. His ascendance to the Golden Throne is seen as his final step in achieving omnipotence. Ferrus Manus is the messenger of the Omnissiah and the bringer of light. He is seen as the closest to the Omnissiah that a mortal can get, and is there to provide an inspiration to the chapter. Like the Iron Hands, the Steel Confessors have an unreasoning hatred of weakness, especially that brought by physical form. They will not tolerate weakness in any form from allies they have. Indeed, several forces have refused to take to the field with them after the Steel Confessors have fired upon them for a perceived weakness, and the chapter is currently undergoing inquisitorial investigation after the destruction of the 54th Talon Desert Raider Regiment for failure to achieve objectives. The link that the Steel Confessors have with the Adeptus Mechanicus is closer than the Iron Hands have, and at any given time, each company is joined by 3 Magi to oversee the upkeep of their equipment and their blessings to the Omnissiah. The gene seed of the Steel Confessors is classed as pure. Indeed, the only flaw it appears to have is shared with the Iron Hands chapter. That of an unreasoning fear of weakness that is turned into unreasoning hatred and anger. As with the Iron Hands, this has been classified as an acceptable mutation due to the abilities it bestows the Steel Confessors in combat situations. There's 2 things I think we can all take away from that. The first is that I am definitely getting better at Space Marine 2. I think we can all agree that footage was much less embarrassing. And the second is, of course, the Warhammer 40k lore is at times a complete mess, and it's quite amazing that we all follow it so diligently. That lore is from, just to repeat, is from these like A4 pieces of paper. You can actually find images of them on the Lexicanum website, and yeah, massive respect to the guy H, who I'm going to say Guy Haley, or whoever it was that uploaded these, because yeah, it's been really nice to fill in that lore. And as I say, that has clarified quite a few things about the faction. So, for example, the lore around the secret hidden chapter master, that, as far as I'm aware, is new. I had never heard that before, and presumably, like, it's exactly the same lore as Rabute Gilliman. They've got their own Gilliman, basically. They've got their own superhuman demigod leader to come out and lead them in the far future when they need it at some point, which is pretty badass. But the faction is, yeah, obviously just kind of really leaning into the Space Christians vibe. It's quite on the nose there. You can't really have a Trinity and not make us all think of the Christians. But yeah, Games Workshop love their imagery, I guess. They were very happy to do that. It's very funny reading that lore today, given how much has happened since 2005, because of course back then, yeah, it would have seemed massively heretical to give the Adeptus Mechanicus their own Space Marines. But now, of course, we have the Primaris Space Marines, and we have Alpha Primus, and the concept of Space Marines working with the Adeptus Mechanicus, or believing in the Omnissiah, or being under the control of the Mechanicus is kind of old lore at this point in time. One of the Dark Angels books that I'll pretend doesn't exist is called War of Secrets, and in that book we have Primaris Marines who have been trained on Mars when they were aspirants, and they actually were brought up to believe in the indomitable right logic of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and they say things like Omnissiah's will instead of the classic Space Marine curse, which is of course, you know, by the throne or whatever. But it's kind of amazing to see how far Warhammer 40k has done, that you can take that lore, which is an insane new revelation back in 2005, but nowadays AdMech Space Marines is relatively, it's kind of run-of-the-mill, really. I mean, compared to Alpha Primus, I mean, what the hell are these guys? These guys don't have all the secret Primarch superpowers just kind of injected into them. These are just normal Iron Hands. But It is, yeah, it's still a really interesting little piece of lore, and I really hope Games Workshop pick it up. Like I say, they have never forgotten that this lore exists. They are referenced repeatedly in different Warhammer 40k novels, so I have no doubt that one day someone will pick up this lore and do something with it. But so far, as we know, it sits on the grand pile of cool Warhammer things that were made that Games Workshop can't remember where they came from, I guess. And at some point they'll get back around to it, I hope. But hey ho. Yes, one step above back of a napkin lore. Yes, that's a good way of talking about it. I mean, as you can see, that if you go onto the Lexicanum website, they're just very clearly handouts for the day. If the lore didn't match so closely to what we'd expect, I probably would have been skeptical, but it looks to be about right. This is like, I don't know, like lost media, I guess, of Warhammer 40k, so it's kind of nice to have this back. And it really shows how much people kind of hang on to really old pieces of lore, that this was a big deal when this came out this week. Ferrous Christ. Yes, good point. We do, yeah, he is basically just Ferrous Christ. Also, it's a bit on the nose, isn't it? Because you have, instead of having the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, you have the Father, you have the Son, and then you have like the Holy Machine Spirit, sort of, not really, but you get where I'm coming from. I feel like that's where this came from. I feel like they went Father, Son, Holy Machine Spirit, had a good laugh, and so they wrote the lore of the Imperium Trinity, which is actually quite funny. Were they given Primaris Marines by Cool? So great question. So of all of my uses of Space Marine 2 footage, that was a bit justified because there are no images of this faction that I could find outside of the image that you can see on the thumbnail. So the only art that we have for this faction is just a depiction of the color scheme, and that's because they actually did paint models, I believe, for the 2005 Games Day. However, they have, in addition to that, published models that people have painted in White Dwarf, etc., where they've referenced the chapter, of course, and the Games Day. So that's why we know with the color scheme, etc., but there's actually no lore for it so far. And I did have a look in the Iron Hand supplement and the Space Marine codexes since the Primaris Marines have came out, and I couldn't see any references to the Steel Confessors, but they don't list all of the successor chapters of the Iron Hands in those, very sadly. So as far as we know, they will have them at some point in the future. I can't see why not, because Cool is obviously going to be closely connected to the Adeptus Mechanicus, so he's going to be able to just give some Primaris Marines to them. And if anything, I imagine for those Primaris Marines, it would be a bit more comfortable, because it was very hard. I mean, the Dark Angels Primaris Marines get treated brutally because the Dark Angels do not trust these Space Marines from Mars. But if they end up joining the Steel Confessors, I mean, their beliefs don't really have to change very much. They can just kind of integrate in really seamlessly with the rest of the Marines. And given that the chapter got almost wiped out once before, they're probably on that list of the long list of Space Marine chapters that were about to die. And then Rabute Gilliman reinforced them. Space Marines working with the AdMech is cooler than Primaris Marines, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, there obviously are differences between those two concepts, to be fair. So there's a difference between Space Marines that were raised by the AdMech for other Space Marine chapters and Space Marines that were raised by the AdMech for the AdMech. But yeah, I get where you're coming from. I mean, the interesting thing about the story, and I imagine something that they'd have to develop if this lore was ever to get expanded upon, is the nature of the Iron Hands just giving them not just some of their gene seed, but some of the gene seed of the most decorated Iron Hands, according to that lore there. So presumably this is very, like all gene seed, incredibly important to the Iron Hands and not something they'd give up easily. And the Adeptus Mechanicus coming to their aid is nice, but not something I would assume results in the Iron Hands giving up a bunch of their gene seed. So they're going to have to develop that. This was very heretical. Like the High Lords of Terror are like, you can't do this. We don't care that the Iron Hands said you can have these Space Marines. You can't just have Space Marines. You're the Adeptus Mechanicus. I guess the Iron Hands and the AdMech are close, but even for them, that is a very, very kind thing to do for the Iron Hands. So, the Steel Confessors, the lore has finally been found. They are very much back. I really hope Games Workshop bring this up again in the future, and they are very much treated as being a very real canonical faction as we see in the novels, but they haven't had any like proper focus. And given that they do hold a very special place in 40k's canon, not just being close to the Adeptus Mechanicus, but basically being their pet Space Marine chapter and worshipping Ferrus Manus as part of a trinity is, I mean, even for the Iron Hands, that's a step too far. So I really hope we see more on them in the future. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching this stream. If you enjoy this kind of content, please consider joining the channel to get access to more content. And please like and subscribe, all of that good stuff. And I will see you next time.